Hello, welcome, and thank you all for taking the time to attend the launch of Our Common Future, the Scottish Green Party's manifesto for the 2021 Holyrood elections. I'm Laura Moody. With polls showing we are on track to elect a record number of Green MSPs, Our Common Future outlines an ambitious green vision for Scotland and clear practical proposals to get there. Building a fairer and greener Scotland as we recover from the COVID pandemic relies on investing in a green recovery that benefits all of us. As a candidate for South Scotland, a region far too often overlooked by parties based in Edinburgh and London, I'm confident the investment plan Lorna and Patrick will outline will boost vital green infrastructure like rail and warm homes and create at least 100,000 jobs across the country. Frontline workers, particularly in the NHS, have got us through the last 12 months. A green recovery must improve pay and workers' rights. The pay rise Greens won for public sector workers in this year's budget demonstrate that we can and will deliver for Scotland's workers. The Scottish Greens are committed to better paying conditions, and we will always fight for a properly funded and publicly owned NHS Scotland. During the pandemic, Scottish Greens secured a ban on evictions, expanded testing for NHS staff, and forced the reversal of the exams fiasco that saw thousands of pupils from lower income backgrounds denied the grades they'd worked hard for. As a mum of 4 school-aged children, I've been inspired by the policy proposals on education, particularly reducing class sizes for primary schools, vital to keep small rural primaries like my children's as the beating heart of their communities, increasing the school starting age to 7, and the renewed focus on well-being, health and social skills for early years. And of course, as this is a green manifesto, we put tackling the climate and nature emergencies at the heart of all our proposals. Transport is the largest source of Scotland's emissions, and they are rising. During the last Parliament, Green MSPs secured free bus travel for everyone under 22, which will start this summer. This will have a huge impact on the lives of young people and indeed on families like my own, and it will help build a culture of public transport across Scotland. Rail for All, the Scottish Greens' ambitious 20-year, £22 billion programme to give Scotland a modern, fast and zero carbon railway also encapsulates the ambition of what the Greens are trying to achieve for everyone in Scotland. It's radical investment-led solutions like this that will truly transform Scotland and improve the economy and people's quality of life, as well as reducing emissions. We have less than 9 years left to tackle the climate crisis. So at this election, the Scottish Greens are asking the people of Scotland to vote like our future depends on it, and vote Scottish Greens. Now I'd like to hand you over to Lorna Slater and Patrick Harvie, our co-leaders, who will introduce Our Common Future in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Common Future sets out a positive programme for government that will secure a green recovery for Scotland. We will invest in Scotland, create jobs, revive industry, and build the modern infrastructure the country urgently needs. It is a programme of change because in the face of the climate emergency and the economic fallout from the pandemic, we need change. But it is a programme that will bring everyone along, no one left behind. Let me be clear though, it is bold, it is transformational, but it is also the minimum that Scotland needs to do to keep up with the rest of the world. To emerge from this pandemic and help lead the global transition to a zero carbon society, because around the world, governments are finally seeing the opportunity and they are moving. There will be no second chance when it comes to the climate emergency, and that is why we need to be bold and decisive with our climate action now. Across the Atlantic, President Biden has launched his American Jobs Plan. $1 trillion in infrastructure and jobs, the biggest investment plan seen in the US since the Second World War. In Germany, the green recovery is already being seeded through bold public investment plans. They're spending an extra €1 billion this year alone to upgrade homes and buildings. The EU is making €265 billion available to invest in a green recovery as part of their Recovery and Resilience Fund. And individual member states are adding much more to that. Scotland must not be left behind. In fact, we can and must lead. The plans we are setting out today will ensure this happens. We will invest in our communities and create tens of thousands of jobs all across Scotland. Foresters, renewable energy engineers, construction workers, countryside rangers, plumbers, builders, electricians, insulation specialists, painters, and decorators. We will create well-paid, skilled jobs, the length and breadth of Scotland. Let me talk you through the 4 pillars upon which our investment plan is based. Firstly, homes. Over 600,000 households in Scotland are in fuel poverty, and homes result in 1/5 of Scotland's climate emissions. We will upgrade hundreds of thousands of homes over the coming 5 years, investing £2.5 billion, creating 45,000 jobs directly in energy efficiency and heating. These are jobs for a wide range of professions in the buildings and construction sector, and the benefits of that will be felt, particularly by the small and medium enterprises upon which so much of our economy rests. In addition, 1,400 jobs would be created in heat network construction and a further 30,000 jobs indirectly as a result of this, our energy efficiency programs. These are not hypotheticals. This is a tried and tested strategy. Energy efficiency investment was a central part of Germany and South Korea's recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. What's more, this is a program everyone will benefit from. Homes will be upgraded, making them warmer and cheaper to run. The second pillar is public transport. We have already published our Rail for All, a detailed investment plan to deliver a modern, publicly owned, zero-carbon rail system for all. Over the next Parliament, we want to deliver the first phase of this 20-year, £22 billion programme, creating 16,800 jobs in construction and many more once the new lines and services are in operation. The third pillar, we would see £895 million invested in our countryside, our parks, and our natural environment. We will create at least 2 new national parks and 1 regional park, invest in a ranger service, put more funds through the Nature Restoration Fund we established in the last budget deal to reverse biodiversity decline. And we will deliver a big expansion on this area under woodland. This will include around 50,000 hectares of new publicly owned woodland, part of a new approach to reforestation that is based on supporting the rapid growth of public and community-owned woodland, rather than simply just handing public money to wealthy landowners to plant conifer plantations. By restoring our natural environment, we can create around 6,000 new rural green jobs and many new economic opportunities, particularly in rural tourism. Finally, I want to talk about my own industry, renewable energy. Last year, 97% of electricity in Scotland came from renewables. That's an incredible achievement. But this is still only the first step in our journey. Over this decade, we will need to switch much of our heat and transport over to electricity. And that means we're going to need more renewables, much more. And we need to bring them online in a way that creates new jobs and brings a green industrial economy. And that is what the Scottish Greens will deliver. Our new deal for onshore wind will double the size of the industry, installing 1 gigawatt every year of this decade and creating 6,000 new jobs. And we will support the growth of tidal power through supporting innovation and investing in local infrastructure like ports. to ensure Scotland is at the leading edge of this global industry, creating another 4,000 jobs and giving us an export-facing industry that will help the world and not just Scotland decarbonise. Scotland is blessed with an extraordinary wealth in renewable energy resources. It's hard to overstate the opportunity that this gives us to build a prosperous and green economy. As Oxford Economics put it in their report last week, these are business opportunities that resemble those that generated Silicon Valley several decades ago. Our common future puts forward a detailed plan that will see Scotland take these opportunities. And it is in stark contrast to the political inaction and even disinterest we have seen to date. The UK government pushed the onshore wind industry off a cliff, and the Scottish government has done little, if anything, to save it. Similarly, tidal power is being largely ignored. The Scottish Greens will change this. We will invest, nurture, and support the growth of a world-leading renewables industry. And we will not duck the tough decisions when it comes to fossil fuels. It is a basic scientific fact that Scotland and the UK cannot burn the known reserves of oil and gas in the North Sea and comply with its commitments under the Paris Agreement. That's why we are calling for an immediate end to new licenses for oil and gas exploration, just as New Zealand has done. And we want to see the revocation of undeveloped licenses and an end to subsidies for the industry, including those coming from the Scottish government. Some of our most skilled engineers in the world are working in fossil fuels, and their skills can be central to our recovery. To ensure a just and fair transition, we will extend the job guarantee to all workers in the oil and gas industry and ensure support and funding is available for retraining and development. It cannot be a just transition without moving away from fossil fuels. Or to put it another way, when it comes to the climate action plan, you can't have your cake and eat it. And right now, it's only the Scottish Greens who acknowledge this and have a plan to phase fossil fuels out while phasing green energy in. Only the Scottish Greens who are not falling for the false solutions being put forward by the fossil fuel industry, like hydrogen made from natural gas. We will withdraw funding from such so-called solutions and focus on what we know works and where Scotland has a profound competitive advantage: renewable energy. The Scottish Greens are promising a new green industrial economy for Scotland. This is the solution to the climate emergency, but it is also how we will emerge from this pandemic together, building a fairer and greener common future for all of Scotland.
Thanks very much, Lorna, and thanks for all coming to the launch of our common future. What we're proposing is a bold plan, because now is the time to be bold. The pandemic has killed so many people. It's shattered lives and devastated our economy. But our economy was sick before COVID hit. The last year has only made it worse. The wealth of the 10 richest men in the world has increased by £400 billion during the pandemic, more than enough to vaccinate the world. At the same time as inequality grows in Scotland and around the world, we're hurtling toward climate catastrophe. And Scotland's been dragged out of the EU without democratic consent. In the face of these challenges, anything short of bold and transformative action would be a betrayal of current and future generations, which is why we are proud today to publish our common future, a bold and ambitious plan to build a better and greener future for us all. But we are not just promising change. The last 5 years have shown that the Greens have the drive, commitment, and integrity to deliver. So throughout this manifesto, we're showing the positive impact we've already had on Scotland and on everyone's lives. From free bus travel for children and young people coming in from later this year, to securing a fairer tax system, this increased funding for public services while protecting low and middle earners, to saving Loch Lomond from a destructive development. We've worked hard for Scotland, and we've delivered these and many more substantial changes that will be felt by millions of people across Scotland and will have a positive impact for years to come. Today, our message is simple then. If this is what the Scottish Greens can do with just 6 MSPs in Holyrood, imagine how much more we could deliver if you give us your vote. When it comes to education, for example, our track record for the last 5 years speaks for itself. The Scottish Greens value teachers and the crucial role they play, which is why we negotiated an additional £150 million as part of a budget deal to give teachers a fair pay rise. During the pandemic, it was pressure from the Greens that led to regular COVID testing for teachers, school staff and senior pupils. And when pupils were downgraded by an algorithm based on nothing more than their postcode, it was the Scottish Greens who forced the government to correct this error. 125,000 grades were restored. And in our most recent budget deal, we ensured that free school meals will be rolled out for all primary pupils over the next year. Our common future sets out bold proposals to continue to build a fairer education system. We'll aim to recruit 5,500 new permanent teachers and reduce class sizes to a maximum of 20. And we'll raise the school starting age to 7 by taking the lead from countries like Finland and introducing a kindergarten stage for years 3 to 6. The Greens believe firmly that during these first years of play-based learning, the focus should be on health, happiness, and building social and creative skills, not on the routine of homework and standardised assessments in primary schools. This principle is at the heart of successful education systems in other European countries like Germany and Sweden. There's no reason why we can't do the same here. As for health, the Scottish Greens have worked hard for Scotland during the pandemic. As early as April last year, it was the Greens who first called for regular COVID testing for frontline health and care workers. Relentless pressure from the Scottish Greens, particularly Alison Johnson, ultimately resulted in this being rolled out. And in the next Parliament, we'll continue to fight for a well-funded and publicly owned Scottish NHS. We'll place mental health at the heart of our healthcare system, on a par with physical health. This pandemic has exposed the huge shortcomings in mental health provision, while exacerbating many of the pressures and tensions that lead people into mental health crisis. That's why we've pledged an additional £235 million to mental health, with a particular focus on giving children and young people the dedicated mental health support they need. But for the Greens, however, health policy is about more than treatment. It's about prevention too. We're committed to tackling the root causes of poor health and health inequalities. That's why we want to provide free access to sports for children and young people, while taking issue to tackle air pollution, which kills over 2,000 people in Scotland every year. And poverty is the biggest driving force in health inequality. From fairer taxes to increasing the Scottish child payment, Greens are taking the action that's needed. On housing, the Greens are the only party that has effectively stood up for tenants during this crisis. Secure an eviction ban while the COVID restrictions are in play, getting a tenant hardship fund created, and getting the legal right for students to give notice to private accommodation providers during the pandemic. The Greens believe that access to adequate housing is a human right, and we've set out a comprehensive programme of change. We'll increase the supply of social housing in particular and bring forward a new deal for renters. Skyrocketing private rents were already stretching household budgets in so many communities before the pandemic, which is why we want to introduce rent controls and other protections to make renting affordable and secure, and improve the quality of housing throughout Scotland. This is an election like no other. It comes at a time when, as Lorna has pointed out, countries across the world are turning on the spending taps to fund the COVID recovery and invest in the infrastructure and industries that we're going to need to meet our commitments to keeping the Earth's climate safe. So the state's role in providing the investment needed is critical. The alternative would be to repeat the failed austerity that came after the 2008 financial crash and abandon our climate commitments. This is not an option. So the spending plans we're putting forward represent our bottom line. It's what we believe needs to be spent to put Scotland on the right path. Let's take a look at the infrastructure investment programme. It will require £1.5 billion a year, and if all of that was additional, it would represent a 25% increase in the Scottish Government capital budget. Since every political party says it believes in an investment-led recovery, we can expect some of this funding to come from consequentials tied to UK spending, but that's unlikely to be enough. We've made it clear that there are areas of existing spending that should be redirected, like shifting the road building budget into public transport. Ultimately, though, this is the time to invest more, and borrowing is the best way to fund this right now. But tax must also play a role. This isn't the time to increase income tax on workers, so we'll continue to call for an urgent UK-wide windfall tax on the wealthiest companies that have profited most out of the pandemic. Our common future also commits to raising revenues fairly by increasing wealth taxes. This is crucial, both to fund our aspirations for stronger and better public services and to build a more equal Scotland. So we're proposing a millionaire's tax, a 1% tax on all wealth and assets above the £1 million threshold. Now, ideally, this would be UK or Scotland-wide, but if that's not possible because the UK refuses, then we'll look to implement local wealth taxes. All local taxation is already devolved. Taxing wealth properly is more urgent now than ever before. Last week, even the International Monetary Fund, of all people, said that wealth taxes should be used to finance an investment-led recovery. Finally, let me outline our position on one of the most critical issues of this election, Scotland's right to choose its own future. The Scottish Greens believe in independence for a purpose, to let us build the fairer, greener society we know is needed. We're committed to building an independent Scotland that is modern, democratic, and outward-looking society that helps lead the global transition to a zero-carbon society, and that plays a positive role as part of the global community. A voice on the global stage for peace, justice, human rights, and for our planet. A Scotland that rejects the hostile environment of Westminster and is open, inclusive, and welcoming to everyone who chooses to make their home here. Independence is also our only route back to EU membership, with Scotland taking our seat at the European table and giving us back the right to work, travel, and study across Europe. So we are clear in this manifesto that an independence referendum should be held during the next parliamentary session. And the legislation covering all aspects of this referendum, including the question and the timing, should be decided by a simple majority of the Scottish Parliament. For Westminster to ignore this majority would be politically untenable and an insult to our democracy. The last year has shown as never before how we all depend on one another and demonstrated the urgent need for political action and collective responsibility. The conditions that allowed COVID to do so much harm were not necessary. The insecure conditions of people's work and housing, the fragmented care system, and the power of the profit motive in so much of our economy. These were political choices and they let us all down. Unless we make different choices, these are the conditions that will allow the climate emergency to escalate out of control and compound its damage. So the Scottish Greens offer an alternative. Our common future is both a comprehensive programme for government that will secure a green recovery and a vision for change, a vision for a better future for all of us. So in May, I'm asking you that you vote like our future depends on it. Vote for a better common future for all of us. Vote for the Scottish Greens. Shall we...
I know.
Okay.
I need to be, we should swap sides.
Patrick, can we come forward and get the 20 behind? Is that right? I think just you come behind, we're out to just go towards the Sorry, there's a mic right one. We've got come towards us. Yep. Yep, that's good. All right,
Okay, so are we moving on to questions now?
Yeah, moving on to questions now. So if you're watching from home, this is my voice that you're Ross Greer. I'm the co-chair of the Scottish Greens Executive. If you are one of the journalists who's joined us on the call, we're presuming that everyone's wanting to ask a question, so we've got a running order. If you need to leave early for whatever reason, just let us know, and we'll try and bring you in early. But we're going to start off with a question from Katrine Busey at the Press Association, followed by David Wallace-Walker at BBC Scotland.
Hello, everybody. I was wondering, you've described this manifesto today as a programme for government, but realistically, the Greens on their own are not going to be in government after this Parliament. You're only standing in by and large in list seats. So is the outcome that you're looking for from this election a coalition with the SNP? And if so, what would be your red lines in any negotiations?
The outcome that we're looking for from this election is as many Green MSPs as possible. The opinion polls are showing that there's not a single area of Scotland where you can't get Green MSPs elected. So this could be the election where we represent every part of Scotland for the first time ever. As for what the wider result is, that's in the hands of the voters. I don't think any political party should take for granted what the result is going to be. We're working for the next few weeks to get as many Green MSPs as possible. And we've shown over the last 5 years that whether you're in government or in opposition, if you put forward good, constructive ideas and you make the case for them, you can make a difference. So that's what we'll continue to do.
I should have mentioned before we started that we are more than happy if folk want to come in with any follow-up questions, but obviously we have a lot of folk in the queue, so if you could be respectful to your colleagues as well, we'll try and get as many folk in as we can. So unless Katrine's wanting to come back, we will move on to David.
Hi, Patrick. Hi, Lorna. Thank you very much. You've mentioned that you think it would be unsustainable for the UK government to say no to a second independence referendum if there's a majority of pro-independence MSPs. But we know that the UK government doesn't want another one, doesn't think there should be one in the next Parliament. If they do say no, and if the courts, a legal battle, didn't find a route to have an independence referendum, would you support the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish government, holding one anyway, perhaps an indicative one, but holding their own independence referendum?
There's a question here about what kind of country we are. If this is a democracy, then the people of Scotland have the right to decide what kind of government they should have, who is in government. While we're still calling this a democracy, it is up for the people of Scotland to decide. I wonder what the UK government's plan B is if we get, as I expect we will, yet another majority for Scottish independence in the Scottish Parliament. This last parliamentary term, we've had, thanks to the Scottish Greens, a majority for independence. And I fully expect in the next parliamentary term, thanks to the Scottish Greens, we will have a majority for independence. It's clear that the people of Scotland have a right to have their say.
Just if I can come back in on that, Lorna, you're correct to say we did have a majority of independents supporting MSPs in the last Parliament, and it didn't lead to an independence referendum. Theresa May said now's not the time. What happens if Boris Johnson does the exact same in the next 5 years?
The speculation I've seen in the media this week is that actually Boris Johnson is thinking of calling it sooner rather than later. And to be fair, that's probably in his interest. We know from polling that something like 85% of young people between the ages of 16 and 24 agree that independence is normal and support Scottish independence. So if he's got any chance of winning his side of the argument, he's going to have to call it pretty soon.
Thanks very much, David. We're moving on to Abby Garton from The National, followed by Greg Hoare at ITV Border.
Hi there. Mine is a slight follow-up from what David was just asking about independence in the next Parliament. Would you back a legal challenge against the UK government if they denied this, to take that through? And do you think that an independent Scotland has a better chance of reaching the climate goals and things that you're putting forward in your manifesto than it does under a UK government at the moment?
I mean, we've said very clearly that the refusal by the UK to even talk about this would be politically untenable. It is possible it could be legally challenged as well, and we would be open to exploring that. But yeah, fundamentally, the track record of the Greens shows that we don't have to wait for independence to take more radical action on climate, but independence would allow us to do so much more that we currently can't do. From energy, where we can spend money on energy efficiency, but we can't regulate the energy companies, to waste, where we have to manage the problem, but we can't control the companies that create the stuff. There's a huge element of the response to the climate and nature emergencies where we can go further, but we can only go all the way with independence. And of course, we would only be representing ourselves at conferences in future like the COP if we were an independent country.
Thanks very much. We'll move to Greg from ITV Border, followed by Douglas Fraser at the BBC.
Hi, transport is a massive issue in the south of Scotland. There's a couple of long-running campaigns to improve the roads there, in particular roads like the A75. Is that something you support? Do you support those campaigns? And if not, then what kind of alternative are you offering? Because when it comes to your rail plan, it doesn't seem to offer all that much to the south of Scotland.
So we've campaigned heavily for improved public transport infrastructure all over Scotland. In the south of Scotland in particular, our Better Buses campaign was part of that. It is necessary to offer everybody alternatives to the car. Even in the south of Scotland, not everybody has a car. And as part of tackling both the climate crisis and inequality in our society, we need to make sure that everybody is able to get about, to do their business, to study, to enjoy everything that Scotland has to offer in terms of tourism. And that includes a full suite of reliable, affordable public transportation, reliable, affordable buses, reliable, affordable trains. And of course, we were very pleased to deliver during the negotiations on the budget this year, free bus travel for all young people, 21 and under, which will come into place this summer. And that should be a real game changer for young people all over Scotland, including in the south of Scotland.
Thank you, Greg. We'll move on to Douglas Fraser at BBC, followed by Jane Bradley at the Scotsman.
Thank you and good morning to you all. On the housing policy, it appears that you are looking to effectively the enforced retrofitting of private homes. You're talking about doing so at scale and a whole street approach with potentially a very high cost to private home owners. You're also looking to a ban on sales of less efficient homes after 2025. Is this not an infringement on home ownership, which might be seen by many voters as going too far?
I mean, if we're serious about tackling not just climate emissions, but fuel poverty, we do need our entire housing stock to be brought up to standard. And the measures to do this are necessary. If you look at what political parties are talking about spending to just retrofit, just install heating systems, for example, that's necessary, but it needs also the policy to make sure that all households are being brought up to that. So requiring retrofit by point of sale is one of the most important ways to do that. There will be substantial grants from the public purse because this is about public benefit as well. So we want to make sure that homeowners are helped to do the right thing. I think most of them want to do the right thing. You know, it's bizarre that we seem to care more about the energy efficiency of fridges that are being sold than of homes that are being sold. And we're still building gas guzzlers and we're still expecting people to live in homes that are expensive and inefficient to heat. So yeah, we do need to take action right across all tenures of properties if we want to see that improved.
Thanks, Douglas. Moving on to Jane at the Scotsman, followed by Muir Dickey at the FT.
Hi, thank you. You said obviously you want to get as many MSPs as possible in this election, and I know polling sort of suggested you could get around 10. If that's achieved, will you be looking to seek a cabinet position in the new government if you were in, had that number of MSPs and the SNP was in power? Is that something you're looking to do?
Well, this came up a few minutes ago, and we're focused on getting that maximum number of green MSPs, and it's for the people of Scotland to decide what the overall balance is. And it'll be for the biggest party, if they don't have a majority on their own, to decide whether they want to govern as a minority, as in the past, or ask others to talk. I really don't think it's worth speculating beyond that until we actually count the votes. That's what you have to do. You count the pieces of paper, and then you know the result. Lorna, do you want to add anything on that? Okay.
Thanks, Jane. Now to Muir at the Financial Times, and after Muir, it will be Libby Brooks at the Guardian.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you on the independence referendum, how urgently you would want for it to happen? Now, do you share the SNP desire for it to be in the first half of the next Parliament, for example? And when it comes to the implications of independence, I don't see anything in the manifesto about the fiscal challenges or the border, the impact on the economy of having a border with England. When would you start setting out how you would address those challenges? Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those questions. In terms of the second question, this is not a manifesto for independence. This is a manifesto for a green recovery, a fair and green recovery from COVID. The question of independence is about whether the people of Scotland have the right to choose which governments are making the decisions about their recovery. And we do commit in this manifesto to asking the question of the Scottish people in the next parliamentary term. For us, we would commit to not a shorter timescale because of the COVID crisis. We feel that during such a referendum campaign, it would be important for us to be able to campaign effectively, to consult with the people. And that means a ground campaign, knocking on doors, and we can't do that until the COVID crisis is eliminated or under control. So as soon as COVID is under control, then I think we could look at doing something, but certainly within this parliamentary term.
Thank you. We're now moving on to Libby at the Guardian, followed by Brian Taylor at the Herald.
Hello there. I was actually going to ask about indie ref timing as well. So I'll just ask a quick numbers question, which is, Lorna, you were sort of rattling through some sort of very impressive figures in terms of job creation. And I wondered if you had sort of a estimated total of those new jobs, and also if you had, I mean, I appreciate these are all sort of ballpark figures, but if you had done anything offsetting the jobs that we know are going to be sort of lost in the oil and gas industry over the coming years.
Absolutely. So that's something I can be very confident about. Our plan will deliver at least 100,000 jobs. That's 100,000 jobs directly. We haven't counted or added in the indirect jobs and economic benefits from our plan. So we are very excited about this. We don't see jobs being lost, we see jobs being transitioned. And that's why we put in our manifesto a jobs guarantee for all oil and gas workers. We know from surveys that 70 to 80% of oil and gas workers would rather work in renewables in a sustainable industry anyway. Oil and gas is a sunset industry. And of course, people would rather work in something that has a long-term future. So let us work together to transition my fellow engineers and technicians and workers away from oil and gas into something that they can work in long-term and help build a fairer, greener Scotland.
Fantastic. And now we move to Brian at the Herald, followed by Chris Green at the Eye.
I'm actually perfectly content to observe with interest and allow my hard-working colleagues to ask the questions. Thanks very much.
Oh, thanks very much, Brian. You're my favourite so far. Moving on to Chris, and then it'll be Kieran Andrews at the Times.
Thanks very much. Could I just ask about the one-off windfall tax that you are proposing post-pandemic? Can I just ask, do you have a level of tax in mind for this one-off tax? And can you be a bit more specific about which companies could be liable to pay it?
I think we're all very clear that, for example, the online retailers, the big supermarkets, these are examples of some of the companies that have profited hugely during the pandemic. Now, we pay huge respect to the workers in those companies, some of whom have gone really above and beyond on the front line over the last year. But the owners, the shareholders, the people who rake in the profits, and some of these companies are stashing their profits right into tax havens. That's simply not an acceptable model for how we should run our economy. So, yeah, we will put huge pressure on the UK government. I make no apologies for the fact that there are elements of our plan today which do involve putting pressure on the UK government to make sure that currently reserved powers are used. There is a huge appetite, I think, throughout not just Scotland, throughout the UK and throughout many countries to start seeing the companies that have profited from the pandemic pay their fair share. So we'll put forward that pressure to the UK government and we'll develop plans for how best we can achieve that in Scotland.
And now to Kieran Andrews at the Times, followed by Chris McCall at the Daily Record.
Brilliant, thank you very much. On the renewables jobs front, we've heard these promises time and time again about there being thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new jobs, and then they end up going overseas to manufacture wind turbines and others, because frankly that's cheaper. So what practical solutions, maybe I've missed it, I can't see any in the manifesto, what practical solutions do you have to make sure that the jobs, manufacturing jobs, actually stay in Scotland?
I absolutely understand what you're speaking about. As a worker and engineer in the renewables industry, we have seen this in our industry, and it is such a shame. And that's why in this next phase of our development of our renewables, we need to take a different approach. We simply can't hand our renewable resources to multinational corporations and hope that they do the right thing. We must place conditions on the extraction of our resources, on the exploitation of our resources. And those conditions need to name specific numbers of jobs, specific amounts of money going back into the local communities, and a commitment to using Scottish supply chains. Those kind of regulations and stipulations were not in place in previous, for example, offshore wind contracts, which is why we see those turbines being built in China and other places overseas. The turbine that I'm working on at the moment is being built in the port of Dundee. It was welded together in Fife, and the steel was bought from Liberty Steel in Motherwell. We can build large structures like this here in Scotland. Our turbine is 73 meters long steel. We can do this kind of heavy fabrication here. We have everything that we need. It's just the political will to write those clauses in the contracts and say, yes, this many jobs, yes, this much Scottish supply chain, and this much money back to the communities. It's political will that we need here.
Thanks, Kieran. Now on to Chris McCall at the Record, followed by Andrew Lermouth at Holyrood Magazine.
Hi, good morning. Two brief questions, if I may. What would you say to those who would view your proposed millionaires tax as a tax and aspiration? And secondly, Patrick, you've been co-leader of the Greens now since 2008. Is it your intention to serve a full term as co-leader in the next Parliament? Or do you hope a new generation of Green MSPs will be able to take centre stage?
I'll take the second question first. I can't wait until there's a new generation of Green MSPs. I'll be delighted to be joined by that incredible new diversity of talent. Unlike most political parties, the co-leader position in the Scottish Greens is elected every 2 years. Lorna and I have been in that role together as a team for about 1.5 years, so it'll be up for election later this year. And frankly, I'm going to think about that after the election. Right now, I'm focused on trying to win people's confidence and enthusiasm for the positive vision that we're setting out, which does include that wealth tax. And let's be really, really clear. It's not a tax on aspiring to have wealth. It's a tax on having wealth. We're a society where a huge amount of the wealth that is generated by all of us collectively is hoarded by a tiny number of people. And it's simply not a sustainable way for our economy to move forward. And if even the IMF, of all people, hardly the most radical socialists on the planet, if even the IMF are saying that wealth taxes have to be part of how governments around the world fund an investment-led recovery, I think it's going to be bizarre if the UK government chooses to fall behind that growing global agenda. If they do, we'll empower local government to find ways of taxing wealth at a local level as well. That wealth inequality has been even more stark than income inequality in recent years, not just through the pandemic, and we want to set our economy on a better, fairer and more equal path forward.
Thanks, Chris. Move now to Andrew at Holyrood Magazine, and after Andrew it will be Niall Christie at the Morning Star.
Hello, thanks very much. You've had a bit of a monopoly in recent elections as the only other pro-independence party with a profile, one's not the SNP. I'm wondering how you feel about the emergence of ALPA in this election. I mean, could they take away some of your votes? Could they stop you getting, I think you talked about, this being the election where you have represent every part of Scotland. Could they prevent that, do you think? And just, do you think they're helping make the case for independence?
I'll hand over to Lorna because there's a danger of me being too rude at this point. Lorna.
I'll keep it clean. So the Scottish Greens are polling better than ever in this election. 10%, 12% we've even seen in the polling. I think that shows not only that we have a core section of the Green voters, but that the people of Scotland really do care about the kind of things that the Greens have been able to bring to the table. They care about inequality, they care about human rights, they care about the climate emergency. And that's what our MSPs have been able to work on in Parliament. We have a track record. We have had MSPs in the Scottish Parliament from the beginning. And in this last parliamentary term, we achieved so much. Free school meals for all primary school children, including during the holidays, free bus travel for everyone 21 and under. We stopped evictions during the COVID pandemic. We stopped fracking. We have such a track record of achievement that I am absolutely confident that our voters will vote for us. Independence is part of our vision for a fairer, greener Scotland, but it's not the only part. And yes, I don't see us losing votes to parties that don't have that kind of track record or experience.
Thank you. Now to Niall at the Morning Star, followed by Tom Martin at the Daily Express. We don't appear to have Niall at this point, so we'll try and bring him back in later if we can get him back onto the call. So we'll just go straight to Tom at the Express, followed by Michael Blackley at the Daily Mail.
Hi, good morning to you both. Just returning to this issue of a coalition, can you just be clear? Are you open to a formal coalition? And secondly, could you see any circumstances in which you work with Alex Salmond and Albert to secure independence? And do you have any sympathy for his argument that alternative tactics now need to be used? Thank you.
Certainly the answer to the second part is no. We wouldn't, and I don't expect him to be in Parliament anyway. The answer to the first part is that there are Green parties in coalition in a number of other European countries. And I think we do aspire, I'm sure we do aspire as a political party, as all political parties do, to taking our role in government. It's for the people to decide what the election result is, and it will be for the biggest party to decide if they want to talk with others. Now, if we were asked, I suspect there are a lot of people in the party who would be willing for us to have the conversation. But as you've heard, there are really massive issues that I don't think the SNP are grappling with yet, like the future transition away from fossil fuels, like the land reform agenda that they haven't taken forward. So, I don't think it's worth speculating how a conversation would go after the election. Our job right now is to focus on inspiring people for the vision that's in this document, and we'll carry on working, whatever the result of the election, as hard as we can to achieve as much as we can of what's in here.
Thanks, Tom. We've got Michael Blackley at the Mail now, followed by Simon Johnson at the Telegraph. And then the last person I've got on my running order is David Ball at the Herald. If anyone else wants to come in, it'd be great if you could indicate that to us now. But we'll move to Mike at the Mail and then Simon Johnson at the Telegraph.
Hi, thank you. Patrick, you had suggested that wealth is hoarded by a tiny number of people, but your millionaires tax, according to your manifesto, will actually hit 1 in 10 of people in Scotland. Can you just say, in terms of all of the different taxes that you're proposing, what proportion of people in Scotland do you actually expect to be paying more? And also on the windfall tax on pandemic profit. Have you factored in any impact that that's going to have on lower income families, for example, through rising food costs? Thanks.
Well, the latter point is quite simple. I don't think it would have an impact on rising food costs. Fundamentally, we need to reform our agricultural subsidies to make sure that we're supporting the production of healthy, nutritious local food and doing it in an environmentally friendly way. That's a far bigger factor than pandemic profits. And the companies that have seen their profits going up, if a portion of that goes onto the pandemic profiteers tax, that doesn't mean that those companies are somehow struggling. They still had their profits going up and are paying a portion of that increased profit back to the public purse, which is, and it is, remember, the public that gives them those profits in the first place. So there would be no impact on food prices. As for the wealth tax, we do estimate that it would be about 1 in 10 people who would be above that. And of course, if your total wealth is only slightly above that £1 million threshold, you're still a very wealthy individual, but you'd only be paying the wealth tax on that small proportion of your wealth above the threshold. You don't pay it on everything below that £1 million threshold. The principle that we established when we proposed and achieved reform of income tax was that we should protect the majority. Everybody on a low or an average income was protected from the changes to income tax. So the majority pay less under that system, and it's only high earners who pay anything more. It's only very high earners who pay very much more. That's the principle that we would want to continue to achieve. And as we've already set out in previous years, a replacement for council tax could achieve exactly the same thing, with most people paying less.
Thanks, Michael. Move to Simon Johnson at the Telegraph now, followed by David Ball at the Herald.
Following up on a couple of questions, would it be fair to say that your ideal scenario would be a minority rather than a majority SNP government, because you have had some success over recent years in terms of getting some wins at budget time, etc. Whereas if it was a majority government, Nicola Sturgeon wouldn't need to listen to you anymore. And secondly, just on the wealth tax elements, I mean, the argument has been made that Scotland needs to attract more wealthy people rather than fewer in terms of getting more investment up here. Would there be a concern that there might be an exodus of people or people moving their money south of the border if these proposals were implemented? Thank you.
I think on the first question, my experience over my time in Parliament is that ministers of whichever political party tend to be at their best when they have to work hard and persuade people, not when they know the votes are in the bag already. So, you know, I think if you have a political system, a parliamentary democracy that's pluralistic, and where ministers know that the votes aren't in the bag before they even turn up for work in the morning, it makes them work hard and it makes them raise their game. I'll maybe pass on to Lorna to add anything on that or the wealth tax issue.
Thank you. So I think this is actually a real strength of the Scottish Parliament and our electoral system here, that a minority government is a very common outcome, and I think that leads to a more grown-up kind of politics, a different kind of politics than what we see in Westminster, where you have the two teams shouting across the aisles at each other and basically being hideous. In Scottish politics, especially when you have a minority government, to pass every single piece of legislation, the government has to work with another party. And that means that we have negotiation, consensus building, compromise. That's a much more grown-up way of doing politics here. So yes, there are lots of advantages to having a minority government, and we'll have to just wait and see what the outcome of that is. In terms of the wealthy individuals sort of myth of economic development, I want to really absolutely challenge the model, what I consider a myth, that public investment drives out private investment. In fact, it's absolutely the opposite. When the government invests in something, for example, a renewable energy project, it not only states a direction of travel and a commitment, it demonstrates that they've done due diligence, that this is an industry they're willing to support. That gives private investment the courage, the protection, and the confidence they need to also invest, so that for a relatively small investment by the government, the Scottish people can see the benefits of a much larger investment because private investors have come in and put their money on the table as well. And that's the model for investing in the future of Scotland that I would like to see. It's a model I've experienced in my own industry. I know it works very well. This idea that we must attract millionaires to our soil and hopefully they'll shower us with their gold is not a way to run an economy.
Thanks very much, Simon. We'll move to David now, and then finally to Niall Christie at the Morning Star. But again, if anyone else wants to come back in, please do just indicate that. We'll try and keep this brief because the sun's now moved to a position where it's blinding our co-leaders when they reach the podium. So we'll move to David and then Niall.
Thanks very much. Can I go back to your plans for tidal power to be sort of scaled up? Can I ask why that technology hasn't been sort of developed yet in Scotland? What contribution can it make to both the economy and the sort of emission targets that have been set, and where that investment's actually going to come from? And would you expect that to be sort of a long term, like we're going to have to wait years for that to be scaled up to be effective?
I kind of can't believe you've given me such a gift of a question. So I'm an electromechanical engineer. I work in tidal energy. I'm currently part of the project that is building the world's largest tidal turbine in Dundee. Now, the whole industry was brought to a sort of stuttering halt in 2015 when the Westminster government cut the tariffs for marine renewable energy. And since that time, no new tidal projects of any size have been developed in Scotland, and not on a commercial level. That's why we've not seen the development of tidal. Fortunately for my company and our competitors as well, funding from the EU stepped in the gap, and the Scottish government has also been enormously helpful in terms of bringing technological prototypes and initial commercial machines to the market, which is what ours is. But without those tariffs, without that market support, we cannot scale up. As you know, we have the capacity in Scotland to scale up. We have Bifab, Ferguson Marine, the Port of Dundee. We have all the infrastructure of the oil and gas industry up in Nig and in Aberdeen, which could be converted to the use of renewables. So we have the absolute scope to scale up. And the answer to that was actually in my last answer as well, which is that public investment brings in private investment. It does not drive it out. So by and the Scottish government has been supportive, but we need more if we're going to grow this industry in a practical way. We need to invest in this industry. We need to persuade Westminster to reinstate those tariffs or become an independent country so that we can have control of them ourselves. We need to invest in the kind of export cables from the Orkney Islands, from Shetland. We need to invest in a proper export cable to Europe from Scotland. All this infrastructure we need, and that will bring in the private investment because it will show a direction of travel and a commitment and give confidence to the private industry. And that is how we go forward with this. It's such an exciting industry. We have in Scotland 25% of all the renewable resources in Europe, and a big part of that is tidal energy. I'm going to do the pitch because I'm here. Tidal energy is reliable. The tide goes in and out 4 times every 25 hours from now until the end of time. We can measure that exactly. Tidal energy is well proven. It's something that my company and our competitors have demonstrated. It will absolutely work. It just needs that push of investment to make it a commercially viable industry. And let's keep that industry in Scotland. Let's not let this industry go overseas the way offshore wind did. Let's keep it here. Let's build these turbines here and base our new economic recovery on it.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll move now to Niall Christie at the Morning Star for what I believe will be our final question of the session.
Thanks, Lorna and Patrick, for giving my Wi-Fi another go. Just to follow up on something that Libby said earlier on, you mentioned in your manifesto about a jobs guarantee, obviously for under 30s, but specifically on the fossil fuel industries. A few questions on that. Will that jobs guarantee cover those who are in the supply chains as well? And how long will this go on for? Looking at that, I would assume, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that it might have a kind of time limit on it. So is there the potential that this is just a short-term solution and that there will be a cliff edge at the other end where fossil fuel workers could potentially fall off if there isn't kind of sufficient investment at the other end?
I appreciate your concerns on the issue, and absolutely that is the whole idea, is that we mustn't leave workers in the fossil fuel industry to have a cliff edge, to be at the mercy of the oil and gas companies as they are in decline and struggling for their very existence. We need to manage this properly to make sure that nobody is left behind. So as we've discussed before, our plan for the supply chain is to, when we hand our renewable resources to companies who are going to develop them, like tidal companies, ask them to commit, contractually oblige them to commit to using Scottish supply chain, so that we can be sure that the supply chain is also transitioned over. I mean, the details of the jobs guarantee we can get into, and we can provide that information to you. But it's, at this point, it's the principle of how we want to approach the problem, because other parties and the government are very much hands off, leaving those workers to the mercy of the oil and gas companies. And we would not see them left so. We would see that they are supported and transitioned into industries with a long-term future.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Now, that is the end of our Q&A.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for your questions. I'm sure there'll be many more opportunities over the final few weeks of the campaign to ask us anything that didn't come up today. But once again, can I thank you for attending the launch of, shall we hold the thing up again just for one more?
Did you guys do it now? So you're not squinting into the sun yet. There we go. Oh, that's so nice. just looking this way. Just looking this way.